With football season upon us now, there's a lot happening in the news, so be sure to subscribe to my other channel, JG9 News, where I give you up-to-the-minute updates on everything happening in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, and I give my thoughts on everything taking place around the National Football League today. And now, on with our feature presentation. I think it's very important for people to have expectations and to have goals that they aspire to achieve. It's something that we, as humans, do all the time, whether naturally or because we're consciously thinking about it. And it's something that makes us, as a species, very unique. We're always thinking to ourselves, man, if I was in that spot, I'd be doing things way differently. Or if I had that opportunity, I'd be doing so much better than this person. Or if I could just be in their shoes, things would be so much different and I'd be taking advantage of this spot and wouldn't squander it. However, there needs to be, shall we say, realism to these goals. And there's a massive difference between ambition and delusion. As an example, if you're 40 years old and you decide to start working out, and you say, if I can just get myself to the gym regularly, I'm going to get in great shape, that's a totally reasonable and perfectly logical and respectable goal. However, if you're 40 years old and you decide to start working out, and you say, if I can just get myself to the gym regularly, I'm going to be playing in the NFL, that's kind of crazy. Spoiler alert, you're not. You're just not. 40-year-olds who have been around the sport forever and are some of the greatest to ever do it aren't even playing at that age. It's incredibly rare for a non-special teams player to play past the age of 40. So the odds that you, an average Joe who hasn't played football and who is currently out of shape, can do it is absolutely delusional and asinine. There's no other way to say it. It's just delusional. However, what's not a delusional goal, at least I don't think it is to build the best football community on this platform to talk about all things NFL history all the time, and to reach 70,000 subscribers. So make sure to hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post about the history of the NFL, like today's weird and wacky story. Thanks in advance for your support. Well, I bring that up because the man you've been watching this whole time is San Diego Chargers wide receiver Jerry LeVias. And during the 1971 season, he bemoaned the fact that he wasn't playing a ton and wasn't seeing the field outside very limited plays. And while it's perfectly within your right to feel that way to a certain degree, what he said next was absolutely insane. And more than half a century later, it deserves a deep dive. Because there's delusion, and then if there's another level of delusion on the grand scale of delusion, it would be whatever the heck this man was thinking. Because more than half a century later, this is the story behind Jerry LeVias, otherwise known as the most delusional receiver in Chargers history. Before I talk about the incident in question and how absurd the man was, we need some context to understand just who this man right here, Jerry LeVias, even was in the first place. You're going to be watching highlights of him throughout with the Houston Oilers for reasons which will become apparent later on. But also because, well, Jerry LeVias was really freaking good with the Oilers. After being drafted out of SMU in the second round of the 1969 NFL-AFL draft, LeVias immediately burst onto the scene by finishing third in the Offensive Rookie of the Year voting and making the AFL All-Star game, with a 42-reception season for 696 yards and 5 touchdowns, helping guide the Oilers to the playoffs in the final season before the merger. He followed that up in 1970 with similar numbers, posting 41 receptions for 529 yards and 5 touchdowns. In his first season in the NFL, with 26 teams in the league, LeVias finished the year tied for 26th in receptions and 39th in receiving yards. Just keep those numbers in mind, because to some extent, they will be important later on in our story. However, at the start of the 1971 season, the Oilers decided to trade this man right here to the San Diego Chargers, with new head coach Ed Hughes saying that even though LeVias was a good player, it was more important to try and get good players on the offensive and the defensive line. said Hughes on the trade, "Jerry didn't put the Oilers in a division championship. Jerry could help me right now, but we needed some other people, and I thought it was for the best interests of the ball club." This is not taking anything away from Jerry, but the best receiver in the world is no good if you can't keep the defense off the quarterback. So just like that, Jerry LeVias, after 2 solid seasons with the Oilers, would be on the West Coast and would look to keep his momentum going with the Chargers, as in a much better team on paper with a much better quarterback throwing him the ball in John Hadel. But even though LeVias should have thrived on the Chargers, it didn't seem to work out that way at first, as there were 2 things that were holding him back from doing much of anything with the team. Number 1, he was already starting behind the 8 ball after he briefly retired for 2 weeks following the trade. I'm not going to dive too much into this, because it could be the story for another video, and something worth exploring down the road, and the details themselves aren't super relevant to the story at hand. But long story short, LeVias didn't report to the Chargers until mid-August, and didn't come to terms with the team until training camp was winding down. Said LeVias, "I just have to get the cobwebs of these 2 weeks of retirement out of my mind and begin thinking about football again." In other words, even after coming back, he wasn't in the best shape and wasn't in the right mindset by his own admission. And it was just a tumultuous period that could have been way more productive and could have led to LeVias having a shot at winning a starting spot. And number 2, the Chargers had a stacked wide receiving corps already. They already had Gary Garrison, a 2-time Pro Bowler at that point and one of the best wideouts in football, who would pick up right where he left off in 1971. And playing opposite him was Billy Parks, the team's 6th-round pick in 1970, who skipped the season and left camp abruptly, but came back in 1971 and looked unbelievable and completely redeemed himself in the eyes of the coaching staff and the front office. Those were your 2 starting receivers. LeVias was used sparingly as a result of all of these things. He just wasn't good enough to see the field a ton and crack the starting lineup, especially once Billy Parks came back. That's all it came down to. He just wasn't good enough. By the midway point of the season, we were 8 games into the year, and Jerry LeVias had 1 catch for 37 yards. That was it. 1 measly catch and 37 measly yards. And you can bet that LeVias was frustrated about his lack of production and the fact that he was only seeing the field on special teams. Because prior to San Diego's Week 9 matchup against the St. Louis Cardinals, in a game that you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, LeVias spoke to the press and let it all out. As he said on playing special teams, "It is frustrating. Running back kicks used to be easy for me because I was warm. Just running back kicks is different. I won't ever get used to not being a receiver and not being a vital part of the offense." Alright, maybe not the smartest thing to say. Maybe not the best thing to say that it stinks having to play special teams, and that's probably not going to help your roster status, considering the fact that many players who are backups make it or break it specifically off of their special teams performance. I get it though. He's frustrated. He's speaking his mind. He's upset that he's not a part of the offense and isn't getting to show off his skill set. All good. It happens. But then, it gets crazy. At this point, LeVias loses his mind, because he said that if the Chargers put him in the starting lineup, and the Chargers actually gave him an opportunity and gave him some reps, that he could do amazing things. How amazing? Well, as LeVias said, being with the passing team, I think I could catch 60 to 70 passes for 1,200 yards at least. Seriously, you heard that right, folks. LeVias could catch at least 70 passes for 1,200 yards. That is the bare minimum. The man with 1 catch for 37 yards all season, if he played an entire year, could have a minimum, mind you, of 70 receptions for 1,200 yards. I'm sorry, what? Did you seriously just say that? Did you, while a member of this planet we call Earth, genuinely say that if you got in, you'd be able to catch 70 passes for 1,200 yards? What the heck are you talking about? Now, you might be thinking to yourself with this statement, come on, you're overreacting a ton here. That's not a crazy amount. And honestly, if this was 2024, you're right, and I wouldn't be making this video. During the 2023 season, there were 40 players to catch at least 70 passes. So for a man to think, hey, get me in there, and I can be one of the top 40 pass catchers in the game, isn't entirely out there. Even if the 1,200 yards might seem a bit out there, it still puts you comfortably outside the top 10 in receiving yards for the 2023 season. So 70 catches and 1,200 yards isn't honestly the worst. It's bold and it's optimistic, but we've seen plenty of receivers that aren't considered great by any means put up similar numbers to that. But in 1971, in the year of our Lord, 1971, to have 70 catches and 1,200 yards? Are you legitimately out of your mind? This man right here is Fred Biletnikoff, and he's a Hall of Fame receiver who played his entire career with the Oakland Raiders and was best known for winning the MVP at Super Bowl 11 over the Minnesota Vikings, in a game that you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. What you're watching right now is clips of Biletnikoff from that 1971 season, where he made the Pro Bowl and helped the Raiders finish with the second best offense in all of football. During that 1971 season, Biletnikoff was so good that he ended up leading the league in receptions. Do you want to know how many passes he caught? Do you want to know, as the league leader in receptions, how many passes this man caught? 61. That's right, 61 passes. That was the top total in 1971. And here comes Jerry LeVias, a 5'8" receiver who can't even crack the starting lineup. And he's out there saying that he could not only beat the top mark, but absolutely smash it and get 70 catches minimum. Like, that is absolutely absurd. The man with a grand total of 1 catch thus far with the Chargers thinks that he could have at least 70 in a season if they just played him more. Unbelievable. And if you thought that was insane, just wait for the receiving yards with his outlandish prediction of 1,200. Because this man right here also happens to play in the AFC West, and his name is Otis Taylor, a receiver on the Kansas City Chiefs. Some would argue that he belongs in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and you can definitely make that argument. However, in 1971, there were few receivers in the game better than he was. During the 1971 season, Taylor helped the Chiefs win the AFC West with a Pro Bowl campaign, an AP First Team All-Pro campaign, and a season where he finished second in the MVP voting, only behind Minnesota Vikings defensive tackle and future Hall of Famer Alan Page. And during that 1971 season, Taylor won those accolades by leading the league in receiving yards, so he was number 1 in that department. Want to know how many yards he had? 1,110. That's right, 1,110 yards. That was the top total in the NFL in 1971. And here comes Jerry LeVias, a 5'8" receiver who can't even crack the starting lineup. And he's out there saying that he could not only beat the top mark, but do so by about 100 yards minimum. Again, his stat line by this point was 1 catch for 37 yards. At this point in time, that was all he had. And he genuinely believes that if he can just play a little bit more, that he would lead the league in receptions by a lot and lead the league in receiving yards by a lot. And it would be one thing if he was close to doing this before. If this man right here, Jerry LeVias, was top 5 in the league in receiving yards the year before, or was at the top in receptions not too long ago, alright, that's fine. You've earned the right to talk and to feel that way. However, we were 2.5 years into his career. The most receptions that LeVias had in a season by this point was 42. And the most receiving yards that LeVias had in a season by this point was 696. So on both fronts, he would need to increase his best output by roughly 40%. For some perspective, if we're going on a league percentage standpoint, to have 70 receptions when the league leader had 61, and to have 1,200 yards when the league leader has 1,110, you need to be 8% better from a yardage standpoint and 15% better from a reception standpoint. In other words, imagine a guy in 2024 saying that he was going to have 155 receptions and 1,943 yards. And now, imagine that the guy saying that is Jawan Jennings. Delusional. Freaking delusional. As for what happened to the man who played for this team behind me right here, obviously Jerry LeVias didn't play a whole lot during the 1971 season on offense. But 2 years later in 1973, he would get his wish and would actually get to contribute a lot on that Chargers offense, starting 11 games and playing in all 14 of them. He would have a chance to actually back up what he said. The final stats? Well, he had about 30 catches for 536 yards. Again, that's solid. It's more than solid, especially for the era, but definitely not number one in the league by a country mile. Not even half of what he promised. In fact, it's not even close. Jerry LeVias was done playing football after the 1974 season, and while he had a very successful career, all things considered, especially since he made an All-Star game and was super fun and exciting to watch, and while he had a great career off the field as a businessman, this was definitely not his finest moment. Not by a long shot. Look, Jerry LeVias was a solid receiver, and no one can take that away from him, especially considering the fact that he was super light and super small compared to other guys out there. And when he was on his game, he was absolutely fun to watch. This is by no means an attempt to discredit LeVias, because as I've said before, the man was solid. Having said that, maybe it's probably not a good idea to go out promising, well, whatever the heck those numbers were. Counting about not being involved in the offense, that's one thing. But thinking that you can put up numbers that only 5 players in NFL history had put up in a single season at that point is downright delusional considering, quite literally, everything. It's like a man with an 18 home run season at his peak thinking he can break Aaron Judge's American League record if he just played more. Or a golfer whose best round was a 78 thinking that he can break 60 at Augusta. Probably not the best idea to say 70 receptions for 1,200 yards minimum. Because in 1971, the initials JL didn't just stand for Jerry LeVias. They also stood for Just Looney. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.